This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Ellen Busch. Thank you for and welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I am great, and I'm so excited to be here and to talk with you.
It's always cool to talk to people from around the world. We've been doing it since 2016. We're actually with this episode 1040, which is like 1040 since 2016, tracking
Wow.
out an Apple podcast. So we're glad to still be out here. And we want to let people know that we do have your website, ellenbusch.com. People can click on that and actually get to that when we're published on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and all the other places that we're going to be on the web later today. And so you'll be able to click through that. If people contact you on there, is that how they get to your books and how to contact you?
Yes, they can contact me through the website. My email is info@ellenbusch.com, and you'll see a contact button on the website, as well as you can find the book itself on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I'm on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
Facebook
Awesome.
under Ellen Busch, and then also Instagram. And it's Ellen Busch 1500. So pretty easy to find, and being, a redhead, it's pretty easy to match up my picture with my name. So yeah.
So yeah, this episode we're going to talk about how I turned an academic death sentence in my life's greatest adventure. Um, so we love to tell people stories, and we like to get to the root of the heart of the person. But like one thing we always ask you people is like, what motivates you? Like, why do you do what
Mhm.
you do?
Sure. Well, I wrote this book because I feel a tremendous sense of responsibility. I have overcome incredible challenges and losses, and I not only survived, but I learned to thrive again. And what I've learned is really valuable, and that's really important. And it's my hero's journey. And I don't know if you're familiar with the hero's journey concept, but the last piece of the hero's journey is the warrior or the adventurer brings what they've learned home to their tribe,
Yeah,
and
like
they share what they've learned.
yeah, the key lessons they can take away from what you've done. Like so that kind of points out. I've always liked to ask people, like, maybe it's too early, but what are the key lessons people should take away from you kind of at the beginning, and then we can dive into it.
What that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that you can go through tremendous trauma, loss, um, and you can heal, you can recover, and you can learn to thrive and fall in love with life
Mm.
all over again. That's the good news. The bad news is it's a lot of hard work, and it's a
Nothing's
lot of
that's worth anything
commitment.
is easy. But I
Exactly.
always find that, people think that successful people always have it easy. They think it somehow just
Oh
happens.
gosh.
And it never has been, maybe people want to portray it that way, that it was easy, but a lot of times, it's never that simple. And so maybe you can talk about like what it means to be dyslexic from, some people might not fully understand. And so maybe you can kind of give people
Sure.
that definition from somebody that, experiences it.
Sure. So, it's interesting. The whole perception of dyslexia has changed over the years. And that's a big piece of my story. Um, it is considered a learning disability, and it is protected under the the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Disability Act.
So if a child or adult is diagnosed as dyslexic, they fall into that category of being legally handicapped. Now, that is a double-edged sword, because that does afford children, accommodations, legal status, and accommodations that are needed in the classroom as they move through the education system. The negative side of that is that it's a handicap, or it's perceived as a handicap. Um,
Mm.
and
So
this
it
is
puts you
a
in the
e-
classification that causes social problems, right?
exactly. So the way that I like to describe it is that it's considered or perceived as an intellectual disability.
Yeah, that's totally wrong.
And yeah, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. We just learned very differently. And we
Yeah.
do not learn like other students, and we need those accommodations and we need that extra time. And what a lot of people don't realize is Einstein was dyslexic.
There's a lot of people who had so-called learning disabilities. They just think
Hmm.
in a different way, and thinking in a different way can be an
Exactly.
advantage. Like in his case, I think that's how he was able to see those physics
Exactly.
issues, like those
It,
concepts. Because
it,
sometimes it's the out of the box person. Everybody
mhm.
wants to be in the box, but it's really the out of the box people who go to the bleeding edge that have a different capability. Hendrix was left-handed. Because he was left-handed, he strung his guitar differently. He
Mhm.
approached the guitar differently. If
Yeah.
he was like everybody else, he probably wouldn't have played that way. So there's a lot of
Right.
things that people have. Somebody could say being left-handed is a problem,
Mhm.
and I think they did. And so there's a lot of things that we try to put people in boxes, and I totally agree. It's like it doesn't measure your capability. You just do
Exactly.
something different. You learn different. You approach
Mhm.
things differently, and maybe that difference society needs.
I agree with you 100%, and I don't think anybody would consider Einstein as having an intellectual disability. It just doesn't
Yeah.
fit. It's so interesting because it's about the perception and how perception changes over time. And as we learn about the brain and human development and child development, and you mentioned the idea that people at one time thought that being left-handed was a bad thing. And my father was actually left-handed, and he was born in 1938. He's passed away now, but he was forced to be right-handed
Yeah. Yeah. That's
when
the
he,
problem.
yeah. So again, it's a perception. It's not the reality. As children, we certainly struggle because the classroom is not built for us. And
Mhm.
generally speaking, I want to make sure I answer your question thoroughly, is that generally speaking, dyslexia is associated with a reading disorder or a reading
Mhm.
comprehension disorder or letter reversal or number reversal. Um, that is certainly true, and that's certainly something that I struggled with. But the issue for me was that I was condemned.
Mhm.
So I went through the school system in the mid 70s. I started elementary school in the mid 70s and then on to the 80s. And my parents were actually sat down in a parent teacher conference, and they were told that I might graduate from high school, but college was out of the question and I would not be contributing to society, that they should focus on finding me a
Oh, wow.
husband to take care of me. I mean, it was a condemnation. And
Yeah, that's a
that
real
parent,
social problem.
yeah, there's not a lot of gray there. Um, that parent teacher conference ended with my mother pounding her fist on the desk saying, "I refuse to allow you to condemn my daughter."
Yeah, I think that's the problem that a lot of kids were put in those boxes with all
Hmm.
kinds of issues that really just needed the teachers to be more understanding, more empathetic, and
Hmm.
not trying to just put everybody, in the same bell curve. That whole
Exactly.
idea of that bell curve is like just because you're not in the middle doesn't mean you can't contribute. The people on the edges tend to have a lot of capability. And just because they don't fit, corporate America does the same thing.
Hmm.
They want people to be in the cube, but then they want a creative. Well, the
Right.
creative isn't the person that wants to be in the cube. The creative person doesn't want to be in the cube. The creative person doesn't want to follow that rule most of the time.
Hmm.
They usually aren't going to follow the rule. They're going to be on the edge, and then
Right.
you don't know how to measure them because the performance review doesn't measure them correctly. Your
Hmm.
analysis doesn't measure them correctly. The test might not measure them correctly, but they could be the best person that you miss because you
Exactly.
just don't know how to understand them.
Yeah, and it's like what you said earlier about Einstein and being out of the box. And that's really, I think, a great way to describe somebody who is dyslexic. We are out of the box thinkers. We are known for being very creative. We are known for being out of the box thinkers. As a matter of fact, and this is really interesting, British intelligence services is actively recruiting people who are dyslexic because of their unique skill set to see patterns that other people
Yeah,
miss.
code breakers, right? They
Exactly.
can actually
Yeah,
see they can see it in a way that a traditional person doesn't see it,
exactly.
you know.
Na-
And it was interesting. They used Native Americans because they were able to, like Cherokee and stuff. They were able to see things in different ways that regular, other people there's no English couldn't see it, you know. But
exactly. Yeah. And then NASA of all places, the rocket scientists, they actively recruit people who are dyslexic because of their unique visual spatial
wow,
skills. So clearly,
yeah, they wanted to see
those,
the patterns too, right? They want patterns, right?
yeah.
Pattern recognition. Yeah,
It's also another way to describe it, or another skill set of being dyslexic is we have incredible visual spatial skills. So hence the NASA example. So we can picture the rocket in our heads, and we could rotate it. We can take it
like a 3D
apart.
model, or you
Yes.
can dive into it in a way
Yep.
that another mind doesn't see.
It's kind of like we're born with CAD software.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Like I'm in
It,
software engineering, I can see that that's very useful.
it's a very useful skill. So it's such a range because we struggle as children learning to read, but yet we have this incredible skill set that now certain organizations are starting to realize that this is really valuable, and we
Yeah,
want those
reading in the
people.
traditional way isn't necessarily everything you do. Like,
Exactly.
everything you do in the kind of scientific world, not reading isn't everything. Like that spatial being able to do that CAD cam picture
Hmm.
in your mind, that's
Yep.
super useful. Like the way, Einstein was able to figure out those formulas,
Hmm.
that people couldn't see, because I think that from what you're telling me, that have I had a key effect on the way he was able to look at the physics equations and algorithms.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a great book out there. I think it's called In the Mind's Eye, and they look back at a lot of historical figures who were dyslexic, and they dive into Einstein and a lot of his papers. And in his papers, he talks about visually playing with these ideas, which is exactly what we were just talking about with the NASA rocket example.
Hmm.
So he had that skill set. He wasn't necessarily reading and
Yeah, you can
studying,
open
and
it up
he was playing with these ideas in 3D in real time in his mind. And that's where a lot of his
without a
creative
computer.
thinking was
So that's how
born.
he,
Without a computer.
yeah,
Yeah,
without a
he did it.
computer, yeah, he was able to get to something that a computer age person could get to. And that probably put him ahead
Yep.
of the curve because he was able to kind of, oh, if I can turn this inside out, I can look at it, then I can actually
Hmm.
see something that you're gonna miss. Because if you can see that
Exactly.
more holistic vision, you're
Hmm.
seeing the whole picture versus
Yes.
like a narrow plane. If you're only seeing like 2D,
Hmm.
it's 3D, instead of seeing the full spatial impact that you can kind of, assume is like, wow, there's things you're gonna see. There's
Hmm.
like calculations that you couldn't have thought of because you weren't in that frame. If you're not in
Hmm.
that frame, you're not gonna see it.
You're not going to see it. And we also are very good at seeing within those great big visualization pictures. We're very good at seeing
Mhm.
patterns that keep repeating. And that's another great tool that
Code, like
dyslexics are.
computer code is all patterns, like any kind
Yeah.
of, well, you're good at coding too, right? Or reading
Yes, and
code.
it's also about patterns in human behavior, patterns in pictures and in nature, and very good
Mm,
at seeing cycles, things that cycle through. We see that because a cycle is a pattern.
Yeah, well,
So
that's
we
like
can.
scientific analysis, right? So
Mhm,
if you're a scientist and you're trying to come up with a theorem, you're trying to come up with, you're going to be able to analyze the data in a way
mhm,
that another person can't.
exactly, exactly. So it really is a gift, but we just don't fit into the education system. And unfortunately for me, when I went through the system, despite going to a and living in an affluent community,
Mhm.
despite going to a great school system, I was condemned. And my self esteem and my self worth were destroyed. My potential was taken away from me. I mean, when you tell the parents of a 6-year old she's never going to college,
Yeah,
that's taking away a child's potential. And for me, I'm so fortunate because I had amazing parents who I'm sorry are both passed away at this point. But they stood up for me and
of
they
course.
fought.
Mhm.
They fought for me. And you know what? They were wrong because not only did I go on to college and get a bachelor's degree, but I also got a master's.
Yeah, I mean that's the fight that a lot of people, people might not have a disability, but they might be put into a class
Hmm.
where they feel like I grew up. I'm a child of the '70s. I grew up outside of Boston. There were people that felt like I shouldn't be there, and
I
so
know how you
like
feel.
my parents had to fight in the same way you fought, and I went to college, and then we
Yeah.
had counselors that said that I shouldn't go to college, not for any good reason, right? And so I was able to get there because I had parents that would show up at the teacher meeting and push and
Yeah.
get me into AP, get me into those things. So like it is hard because you can get labeled and people get labeled. It's terrible how the labeling happens, but it's like
Yeah.
it's not fair to any person, that's a human being to get labeled without judging you for what you can really do. And I think that
Right.
now you mentioned like NASA and people actually seeing that the capabilities of people with
Hmm.
dyslexia, but the education system, are they catching up with with like what NASA and the military and other people have figured out?
Um, in some ways, I think there's definitely progress that's been made. Um, but we still have this stigma of we're legally handicapped. We're legally still under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yeah, so that's a label.
Um,
That's a problem.
and it's the label, and it's such a double edged sword because, in one way, we need those protections. But on the other side of that coin, it's that
And the other way they
label
hurt you.
is it's so
It's kind of
detrimental.
limiting, right?
It's
Because
very
the
limiting.
mindset of the people in the majority, when they see that label, they
Mhm.
automatically attach a handicap. They automatically attach that it's the like mental capability, like you were saying at the beginning. Just because
Exactly.
you're under American Disability Act doesn't mean you don't have intellectual capability. And I don't know why the
Exactly.
conversation hasn't happened to kind of
Mhm.
teach people in the majority that like, okay, we need to protect the class of people, but doesn't mean that they're not capable.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, how do you thread the needle to get people to like, oh, well, they just want to think one way. And like, it's
Right.
always like, it's never that easy. Well, some people want to make it that easy because they want to stay within the paradigm. But,
Right.
so how do you push against the paradigm?
It's tough. It's really tough, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because, you know, one of the things I've learned and I bring back to my tribe is that there isn't an intellectual disability. And if your self-esteem has been hurt by this label or your self-worth or your potential's been taken away, like what happened to me, you can heal from that.
Hmm. Like a limiting belief that's not true. It's like it's not a truth. It's a belief. It's not the truth. And so
It's false.
yeah, so that's a hard thing because some people they don't won't have a disability, but they can get hit with limiting
Mhm.
beliefs that actually hinder their progress.
Yes, and one of the sources that I cite is a term called learned helplessness. And it's a psychological term,
Mm,
and I'm not an expert on it, and I will defer to the experts. But I do touch on this in my book, and
Mhm.
this is something that I think you're kind of alluding to, is when you tell a child that they're broken and they're brain damaged and they're dyslexic, at some point they're going to respond to the world as if they are, because they keep getting that message.
Mhm.
So you're
Yeah,
teaching them that.
you're teaching them to limit themselves and their
Mm-hmm.
possibilities because if you get society has social mores. I was a sociology major in college,
Ah.
and people get into these mores. They get into these like societal norms. The
Mm-hmm.
societal norm wants everybody to be in that bell curve, and when you're
Yes.
outside of it, they want to say, "Oh, you're the other. You're the other. You're the
Right.
problem." And
Right.
so and
You're
then they
either the
wanted to like
problem.
denigrate you
Yeah.
with a solution.
If you're lucky, you get to be in like the Einstein genius category. But if you're on the other end of that bell curve, it's like you said, you're a problem. So yeah, and there's not a lot of
Yes.
wiggle room in there. So
Yeah, they just want to, put blame on it, make you feel like you're faded, that you're,
mm-hmm.
and designed to fail. And like that's not a good place to be with
Nope.
a youthful mind or any kind of mind until
Yeah.
you can break through the like crucible moment when you realize you can take the reins and you
Mm-hmm.
can first like realize you're not limited.
Yeah.
And even if people think you are, they once you realize you're not, then you that's the key
Yes.
because then you can start pushing. And
Mm-hmm.
regardless of like you lose friends or you lose people that don't like you when you push. Well,
Oh,
that's
there.
okay
Yes.
because there's a group of people that will like you.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
matter about the people
Right.
that fall off versus the people where you need to go.
I think you're 100% right, and that has been my experience.
Yeah, that's a hard
So
thing because some people get scared of losing. Yeah, but if you're in a codependency, like maybe you need to lose that.
yeah, well,
Yeah, that's not really helpful.
yeah, and that's what ended up happening to me is, my low self-esteem and low self-worth made me very vulnerable to predators. And
Mhm.
fast forward 20 years, and when I get married, surprise, surprise, I end up married to a narcissist.
Oh, yeah, it's not
Yeah,
good.
not good. We had one incident of violence, and I had 6 years of narcissistic psychological abuse. I had to plan and execute my escape, and I did so, and I got out safely, obviously, but not everybody does. And
Yeah, it's a hard thing.
it's tough. And I think that low self-esteem, low self-worth makes you vulnerable to the predators no matter what the cause. In my situation, the cause was the dyslexic label and everything we've just been, talking about. I had the great parents. So it wasn't like I came from a family where there was abuse, because that was not the case. But when you have
Mhm.
low self-esteem and low self-worth, the predators are looking for you. They really are.
Yeah, and you had your degree, right? I mean,
Hmm.
but you still had. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Like you can have a lot of capability. I run into people that are
Yep.
very capable, but they're
Hmm.
subject to predators because they don't believe in themselves. Like you could have somebody that you
Exactly.
see on stage, they look real confident, but they really got a lot of self-loathing. And
Exactly.
even though you're on that stage and they're presenting this other version of themselves, they still don't feel that way. They
Hmm.
what they present is not what they feel. It's like a mask.
Exactly.
And then
Hmm.
it's like, oh, they couldn't believe that they actually got conned or they got put into this or they're with this
Yeah.
person. It's like, why? They have this
Yeah.
capability, but they don't believe it. It's like that's all it's like the mindset is very powerful.
It's very powerful. And I've heard you talk about mindset in some of your other podcasts. And it's so interesting because in my case, the belief that I wasn't worthy, that I was brain damaged and I was broken was so ingrained that I wasn't even conscious of it. So here I am with a bachelor's
Mhm.
and a master's degree and an articulate, capable woman. And I had low self-esteem and didn't even realize that it was plaguing me. And it was after that I got out and realized I was completely traumatized and needed help and needed to get to work on myself, that's when I began to shed that label.
Hmm. Yeah, you
And
have
it
to
was
hit it when you hit something dead on. It
mhm,
hurts, right? Because it's hard, because
it
you might,
hurt.
even though you were in something, you were in a pattern, right? And the pattern
Mhm.
might be comfortable to be in the pattern, even though it hurts. It's like hard to get out of a pattern, right? It takes a lot of work, right?
It does, and I knew I was in this pattern, and I knew that if I didn't break out of it, I might not survive the next time because I
Mhm.
I was lucky to get out alive. And, one of the things that I have learned is that 70% of women and men, this isn't just about women, who are in an abusive, intimate partner relationship, 70% of them are killed when they try and leave.
Yeah, it's very bad. I mean, you can see the numbers with if you check, the criminology of it, and
Mhm.
you start doing the analysis, and people's like, well, what's the pattern here?
Yes.
And they're seeing the pattern with the domestic violence. It's like it's the
Mhm.
person that
Mhm.
that kills you more than serial killer. Everybody's always looking for the serial killer. The
Yep.
person that usually kills you is your partner,
Yeah,
is your husband, is somebody that's close to you. That's
exactly.
the person that does it. But everybody's
Mhm.
looking for the boogeyman. They're looking for the whatever, like some kind of Scorpio killer, or like, they're always looking at, yeah, and there are people that
Yeah,
do that, but that's not the common situation
right.
you just talked about.
Yeah, sometimes they need to look right next to them.
And I
Yeah.
think that's harder for society because sometimes those people, they're in positions. They're
Mhm.
in the chamber of commerce. They're some executive. They're a businessman. Everybody knows them. They're in the church.
Mhm.
Everybody knows them. They can't possibly be that person.
Right.
But then you have to deal with the heat that if you
Mhm.
challenge it, right, everybody
Yeah,
thinks they're good.
yeah.
Everybody thinks they're great.
And it's so interesting that you mentioned that because, the church piece of it. My ex-husband used to take his father to church all the time, and this was part of his mask. And it's very
Mm.
classic for the covert narcissist. And what I figured out after the fact is that he didn't go to church to worship with his father. He went to church because of how it looked.
It's a cover. Yeah, it's like a cover
Yep,
story,
yep.
like James Bond.
Yes.
You gotta have a cover.
Mhm. He wanted to look good in front of the community and society, and that was one way to do it.
Yeah, my grandpa used to say, like, if you have to profess that you're good all the time, then I would that's kind of suspect.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
It's kind of suspect because, like, if you're good, you're good. You don't have to
Exactly.
show that you're good. You don't have to kind of display your good. Like, it is innately, that's what it is.
Right.
If you have to put on too much of a show, you're like, too much show, no go.
Right. It's not real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
But then what did it take to persevere? I mean,
yeah.
how did you get the kind of energy or the focus to realize
Yeah.
that?
Y I saw the pattern, and I realized if I didn't break the pattern, like I said, I my life would be in danger. And for me, what was at stake was my life. So I was willing to do or go emotionally wherever I needed to go. And
Mhm.
I first started to work on the trauma piece of it. I was so traumatized, I was driving through stop signs and red lights.
Mm.
I
So
could barely
you're in your head so much you weren't
exactly.
recognizing what was going on in
Yeah.
reality.
I was kind of disassociated from my body as well as, like you said, reality. And I went to work with therapists and coaches. I have done about 5.5 years of intense EMDR work. I don't know if people are familiar, if people are folks
I
are
think we
familiar with
talked
it.
about it, but you wanna probably bring it to the table again, tell people what it means.
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly what EMDR stands for, but it is specific to trauma, and it uses rapid eye movement with a certified, licensed, credentialed therapist. Only work with, people with real credentials, please. I say this over and over again. This is my mantra. It's like,
Mhm.
in real estate, it's location, location, location. With
Yeah,
therapists and
certification.
coaches, it's
Yeah.
credentials, credentials, credentials. And it helps you to basically rewire the brain,
Oh,
and
it's a remapping?
it remaps or rewires the brain and breaks the trauma cycle.
Mm.
And it has been tremendously effective for me and life-changing.
Wow, so that was a
Absolutely.
real, like, action that you took that had, like
Yes.
like, a real meaningful plan
Yes.
that had decisive, like, actions
Mhm.
that had results.
Yes, it was step by step, therapy session after therapy session. The other thing I did too is I've worked with several different life coaches, again, with really great credentials. And what a lot of people don't realize is that therapy is usually about looking backwards. Coaching is about looking
Mm.
forwards. And what do you want to
Yeah, that's true.
create in your future? And that has been a game changer for me and has helped me to thrive. And you asked what helps me to persevere. And when you do this kind of hard work, you get rewards. It gets better. You feel better. When you start to recover from trauma, you start to feel better. And it starts to take on a momentum of its own, or at least this has been my experience. And it's a momentum that is a positive momentum, kind of like getting that snowball to roll down the hill.
Yeah.
And things get better, and you heal, and you learn, and you grow, and you heal again, and you learn, and you grow. And it
Yeah, it's
just becomes,
exponential. Once you start going on the
yeah,
test, yeah. Yeah, it's that,
it
on a kinda positivity path, right? Like, if you go the negative path, you might just focus on the past without trying
exactly.
to resolve the present or the future.
You know, and to your point, exactly, if you're constantly looking into the past and you're not healing, you know, I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. And okay, so you survived. You survived a tragedy, you survived something really, really awful, major loss. Now what? How do you learn to thrive? And you have to take those steps and be willing to push on your own boundaries and to really go after what you really want in order to really learn to thrive. Because surviving is great.
Mhm.
That's really important. That's the first step.
Mm.
You don't have anything without that survival.
Yeah, it's the basic, like, first step is to, maintain survival.
Exactly.
Then start to flourish and have fun, to actually
Exactly.
feel good, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And what I've learned and where I am now, and I still work with a therapist and I work with coaches, is that there's still healing going on. And I'm still uncovering, those seeds that were planted in elementary school and still digging them up and disposing of them. But it's really become a journey of self discovery
Mhm.
and growth. And that's where it gets really exciting. And you get to take steps and do things that you never would have considered doing before. One of the things I write about in the latter half of the book is I've done quite a bit of training with um, retired Navy SEALs.
Mhm.
And that has been where I've really learned to thrive. Those coaches are amazing, but they're also the best in the world at what they do. So I have done
Yeah,
martial.
the extreme capability.
Yeah, they're amazing. And I've done martial arts training. I've even done some firearms training, mindset training, yoga, breath work, with these retired SEALs. And that's where I have really stepped up and moved into the space of just thriving and exploring my own capabilities.
Yeah, it's always hard. Sometimes you got to push. And when you push, you do things that you never did before or not
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. You're not going to be the best. Right. So
Right.
sometimes some people just want to stay on something. They go, okay, I'm going to stay in the factory doing this one task because that's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that satisfies me. It buys my boat, pays my mortgage. It's fine. But did you have a dream that you wanted to go, you know, beyond Broadway? You wanted to paint. You wanted to, but people told
Yeah.
you that was foo-foo. That was like, you can't do that, and so you do something that kind of barely gets by just because it's like, it's not, you don't challenge yourself.
Yeah. I don't think for me, nobody's ever asked me that question. That's such a great question. Um, I didn't have a specific dream other than writing the book and moving to Colorado and spending all winter skiing. But that's a
Oh yeah,
sport.
you had a plan to do that. You wanted to do
Yeah,
that.
exactly. That was my plan. But it's so interesting because all of my life, growing up or moving through the education system, I should say, I always heard you're not good enough, you're not capable, you're never going to be able to do that. And just every version of that. So I got
Mhm.
into this habit of just kind of smashing that idea, first with a bachelor's degree, then with a master's degree. Now I've written this book, and I've always had this very adventurous personality. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the archetypes. And I
Yeah, I
took a
think I heard
person,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, I took a personality test, and I came up as the explorer archetype. So I just
Oh,
naturally have a very curious nature. And I'm always out there wanting to learn the next thing and exploring this and exploring that. Um, I've got certified to scuba dive when I was 17. My father really saw the explorer
okay, good.
archetype.
You like to go out there. You really,
Yeah.
yeah, you really want to go out there. You go scuba diving.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, like I was saying, my dad really saw that explorer archetype in me at a very young age. And he knew that could be a tool to teach me how to persevere.
Yeah,
Because,
well, if you get
you know,
into something like that, then you're going to
mhm,
learn discipline. Like, in order to be a diver, you got to have discipline to be able to do it right, so you don't hurt
exactly.
yourself. So,
Exactly.
if you start putting, you want to go skiing, you got to learn it. It's kind of
Hmm.
dangerous. It could be dangerous. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do downhill mountain biking. I mean, that's dangerous. But
Yes, it
I like
is.
it. But I like to do it. But you have to have a certain level of skill to be able to go down a
Hmm.
Vermont mountain. Like, you can't just do it. It's like, well, I don't need any training. I don't need a back. Like, you gotta have a certain level of discipline, and
Exactly.
you gotta be willing to engage fear. Like, if you have a fear of heights, oh, I don't know if you should be doing that. you know,
Exactly.
but- so like, how do you get over it? Like initially,
Hmm.
when I first hit the mountain, he's like, whoa, 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 I don't know if I should go down this cliff.
Right.
but like,
Right.
at some point, if you're gonna do that,
Hmm.
you do it. Like, the more you get into it and you get the training, but you have
Yeah.
that adventurous kind of personality, that the first step might be hard. And you
It
might have some
is.
trepidation, right? You have trepidation, but that doesn't mean you can't do it.
Right. I was scared when I did my first checkout dives. And, when I was 15, my dad sent me on Outward Bound. We did 2 weeks whitewater rafting, hiking, climbing, and rappelling in Utah. And that was scary. I was
Mhm.
terrified to
Yeah,
rappel a
that could
100-foot
be scary.
cliff.
Repelling could be yeah, that's
Right.
scary.
It's very scary. But I always wanted to do these kinds of things. And my dad always said to me, he said, "Ellen, you can do whatever you want, but get properly trained."
Mhm. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
you can't be reckless. Like
Mhm.
some people like, well, oh, you're adventuring, but if you're venturing with like a reckless abandon,
Yeah.
well, you might end up not here.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so you get it's like it's some level of risk,
Mhm.
but I like that's 120% risk. Like
Exactly.
you might have 10% risk, but like if you give yourself 150% risk, well, maybe you're doing it a little too much.
Exactly. I like to look at it as being properly trained is risk mitigation. And I get out there and I enjoy so many different things, hiking, the skiing, rock climbing, rappelling. And I do these kinds of things with friends, but I choose very carefully who I'm out there with also. You choose your scuba diving buddies very carefully. Are they
Mhm.
trained?
Yeah,
Are they reliable?
yeah,
Are they disciplined? Are they going to be able to help you if you're really in a pickle? Are they going
yeah,
to be able to save your life? So there's a lot to think about there. And I think by starting and doing those things at a very
yeah.
young
You do have to
age,
know who.
yeah, I started doing those things at such a young age because that's how my dad trained me. He was training me. And
Mhm.
when it came time for me to survive and recover and learn to thrive again, I started to apply those things into my life again.
Yeah, that's a cool thing your dad did because those kind of skills gave you like another option.
Mhm.
Because if you sometimes the people like when you have like disabilities, the people try to put you like in a they put you in a blanket to try to like, protect you, and
Yeah.
then they're so scared that you're going to get hurt, they won't let you do anything, right? So it's
Right.
like so then if you get people who are totally overprotective, then it's going to be even worse because
Mhm.
you don't have options and you're going to feel like you can't do anything.
Right.
And versus like having it's cool that your father had this like, well, yeah, I'm not going to stop her from diving. I'm not going to stop her from doing this. And why not? That's another way. That's another path.
Exactly. And he used to purposely give me really hard chores. And again, comes back to what you were saying about the discipline and hard work. And one of my chores was we used to heat a lot with firewood. And I had to stack cords and
Mhm.
cords and cords of firewood. And I was like 7 or 8 years old. And he made me do it. And I'd complain about it. And I'd say, Dad, this is really hard. And he'd look at me and he'd say, it's good for you. Put hair on your chest.
Yeah. Well, it gives you, yeah, it's a kind of weight training.
Hmm.
You're doing something that you're going to build up some muscle tone. You're getting some rigor. You're getting some discipline, realizing
Yeah.
that you need to do a task. There's a reason for the task. And,
Yeah.
sometimes people today maybe don't realize you do need to give young folks tasks that might be a little difficult. And everybody can't just win. You know,
Right.
win all the time
Right.
isn't really teaching you anything. Like if you
No.
if you don't learn how to lose gracefully and
Hmm.
have a lesson learned, if
Yep.
you're artificially being told that everything you do is perfect,
Right.
how are you ever going to progress?
Right. Right. And it was so funny because I used to complain about these chores. Of course I did. I was 8. And he'd say to me over and over again, it's good for you. Put hair on your chest. And I'd say, but daddy, I'm a girl.
Yeah, they need to factor that in.
And he'd say, doesn't matter. Go do it anyway. I'd say, okay. And I'd stomp off and go do my chore.
But it's
But
cool that
yeah.
he got you into doing the outdoors things because, like, some people might feel like, well, if they try to control
Hmm.
like who the kids are, and he's like, well, my kid, you know, is not going to the mountain bike because that's dangerous. So they won't let their daughter go to the mountain bike, won't let them do the downhill ski. They were like, well, you can go be a ballet dancer. Well, you could hurt your ankle. You could break
Yeah.
something there. But it's like, but you're kind of not thinking, it's like, why not allow people to do things that maybe you thought only the boys could do, but allow
Right.
everybody to do whatever they feel like doing. Or if they feel like they want to downhill ski or dive, or race
Mhm.
car driving, or like why not? Like, why
Yeah.
does it have to just be like one thing? It doesn't have to be one thing, that mindset.
And, and it would, and you and I are pretty close in age. So, in the 70s, in the 80s, for girls to be doing those kinds of things was really not that common.
Yeah.
And, growing up in a New York City suburb, it was looked down upon. Like the other girls would look at me like, you're going to go do what? We're
Yeah,
going,
definitely. You didn't have any
yeah.
girlfriends that were going with you? Did you have any girls that would go with you?
No, I had a sister and cousins who were pretty active. So I definitely had that piece of it. Um, we were always active out on the ocean and on the
Mhm,
beach, as little kids. So that fit there, but it was more like when I got to middle school and when girls are really starting to become girly. Um,
mhm.
that's when things started to get a little uncomfortable and I started to realize I was a little bit different. It was okay because I was supported at home.
Yeah, support's important.
It really matters. It was funny because my dad asked me if I wanted to get certified to scuba dive, and I was so excited I nearly jumped out of my own skin. I was like,
That's cool.
"Really? I get to do that?" He's, "Yes, but we're gonna get you properly trained." And, I went and got certified, and
That's
I
awesome.
was
They have support
yeah.
like that, 'cause, like, that's not, like, typical of the '70s, that's not where the mindset of most dads, at least one dads I knew in the '70s, they were like, "What?"
I
They'd
agree
be
with
like,
you. Yeah, I agree with you 100% that it wasn't common. Um, but my dad knew that that's what I needed. He knew that I had my personality that was good for me. And in fact, I was still in high school at the time. And, now you will see even middle school, 14, 15-year olds getting certified to dive, but
yeah, it's a
not,
different world now. There's, like, so
it's
many.
different.
Yeah, there's so many women are into sports that were, like, not allowed when I was a kid.
Oh yeah. It wasn't
That
allowed or
Yeah, when
it wasn't socially acceptable.
yeah, it wasn't even thought that they wouldn't even have that team
Right.
at all. And now you have so
Right.
many female teams and,
Mhm.
people able to do things that they didn't expect. Um, yeah, I mean, because I mean, when I was doing downhill mountain biking, when I first started doing it, then suddenly there was a lot of, women that got into it. And we were
Yeah.
like all the boys clubs that we were in, we're like, wow, they're into it. And some of them were kicking our butt. And it was like they got better moves than we got. So, like they've been doing it, like, wow, and like, where are they riding? It's like, well, how come we haven't seen them before?
Right, right, right. Oh, that's great. I tried the mountain biking and that not for
So,
me. I'll stick to
yeah,
my skis and my flippers.
yeah, it's a little tricky because you gotta stay on the bike and it's
Yes.
just yeah, so staying on a bike is different than skis. I know the skis probably is a different thing.
It's
Um,
very different.
yeah, it's just interesting, like, that you were able to, take this, your situation and thrive, like you said at the
Mhm.
beginning. And that's a real lesson learned
Mhm.
because there's a lot of people that get hung up because they believe that, that limiting belief.
Right.
Yeah, and they get stuck in it.
Yes.
And society kind of is like designed for that.
Mhm.
Like to kind of push out of that as not like the normal course that things are set up for. So you kind of going against the wind.
Yes. Well, I have to admit I was stuck in that belief system for a long time. I didn't, I wasn't aware of how powerful it was and how detrimental it was. And it wasn't until I ended up in a life-threatening situation and was completely traumatized that
Hmm.
that's how I got out of that
That was the
because
catalyst. Yeah,
I had to.
you had a like situation where you had to fight. It was like a fight flight. You chose to fight. You know,
Yes.
and it's kind of like where people a lot of times we've talked to people on the podcast, like that crucible moment
Mhm.
is kind of like the fight or flight. Like you're gonna make that key decision.
Yep.
You've been doing this,
Mhm.
didn't work. Now
Right.
you're gonna try this other thing.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's the thing that's gonna lead to like the positivity
Mhm.
and the positive reinforcement. You know, the law of attraction. You're gonna get brought. You know, the people will see you. You know, the way you want them to be seeing you, rather than the way they want to label you.
Mhm. The authentic person.
Yeah, it's like vulnerability, though. I mean, there's a vulnerability when you start to take it on because you got it's a lot of work,
It is.
and you're not going to go 0 to 100, right? Like a lot of people, today's people are so immediate; they
Mhm.
want
Mhm.
instant results.
Right.
Like if I go do this in 10 steps, it should just be done. Well, you're probably going to need to
Yeah.
do that for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of steps that are not like
Mhm.
temporary 10 things you do and it's done, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like never done, right?
You know, and I think your point is so important. For me, from when I escaped to when I finished the book was really a 10-year journey. And there's a lot of people out there who are not going to want to hear that. But that's the truth. It's really been a 10-year journey of healing and learning to thrive. And I had a really interesting experience it was about a year ago. So when I escaped, I was in Florida and I drove back to New Hampshire.
Mm.
I took my two dogs and drove back to my parents' house because my parents took me in. Thank God. Um, and I remember I was driving, that 95 corridor. I was driving through, and I was driving through DC, and it was snowing, of all things, lightly snowing. It was in the
Mm.
middle of the winter. And I looked over, and at one point when you're on 95 going through DC, you can see the Washington Monument.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember seeing that and thought, wow, that's really pretty. It's a shame I don't have time to stop and see some sights, and I gotta get moving forward and take care of my life. And then one of the coaches who I worked with is a recently retired FBI agent, and he's in the DC area. And I flew out from here about a year ago and did 22 hours of physical self-defense training with him. So it's almost
Wow,
exactly
that's
10
cool.
years later. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. 22 hours and 2 days of training. It was physically demanding and it was a phenomenal experience. His name is Dennis Stoika,
It's very
and
intensive.
very intense. And he does Krav Maga, and also, real reality based self-defense. And with a dangerous ex-husband out there, I felt that was a really smart thing to do. And I was
Well, that's good.
driving to
That's
his, yeah, it just makes sense. Again, another step in learning how to thrive and build self-confidence. And here I was driving up 95 almost exactly 10 years later. And I looked over to the highway and I saw the Washington Monument again.
Oh, wow, that's cool. You see it again.
And it was it kind of just framed that 10-year journey. And I was like,
Bookends it.
wow, the
Yeah, yeah,
last time I was here, I had just gotten away from my ex. I had just escaped, and look where I am now. So
yeah,
that
big.
was,
Well, yeah, it just shows like the progress. Like when you're
yeah.
making progress, it can be reflected and you feel that energy. You know, 'cause I
Yeah.
think a lot of things in life are like energy and frequency, and you move toward the things that actually generate like positivity,
Hmm.
and you're drawn toward like the future that you should be.
Yes.
The future that should be rather than what it could be. You
Hmm.
know, like you try to make, you make it happen. And a
Yes.
lot of times, like you make it happen because you put the work in. It's like nothing's gonna happen if it stays in here. Like if it stays in
Right.
there, then like you have to act on it. You know, you can have the
Hmm.
best ideas, it's like, but if you don't execute, where's it
Right.
gonna go?
Right. And it's such a great example of doing the self-defense training. You know, I wanted to make sure that I never was in that situation again of where I was going to be abused. And part of that is learning how to defend myself. But to your point, it's not just about being able to physically defend yourself. It's about the mindset and the self-confidence that comes with training and going through a rigorous, intense training program. You come out the other side a different person.
Yeah, that's a big effort. Like anybody that
Yeah.
goes through that kind of training,
Mhm.
that military aspect training, when it comes to FBI, SEAL, Navy, like you
Yep.
have the discipline. My brother was like, he's Navy corpsman in the Iraq War. And
Oh,
he had
wow.
that, like, he had to go out on the battlefield and go through a minefield and get people off, out of the battlefield as
Wow.
a Navy tech. But it's like that kind of driven expertise. He's a tech. He's got to go through out in the minefield and get the people who are wounded.
Yeah.
So he's got to have that military expertise and the medical expertise
Yep.
to save people's lives. And it's a discipline and it's a physical rigor.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And,
just
it,
like a lot that's just really, it really, he always talked about it gave him a lot of purpose and a lot of mindset of like
yes.
what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah. Yeah. I came out of that 2 days of training with Dennis and I felt like I could handle the world.
Yeah, if you get the tools, it's just
Mhm.
the tools to do the job. It's like there are tools in your for your head, and
Exactly.
then there are
Yeah.
tools that you physically for your hands. And so
Right.
when you get the synergy of figuring out like
Mhm.
how to make make all that work,
Yep.
and some people it's like it's a multiple legs to anything. It's not
Yeah.
just one thing, and that's where people I think make mistakes. They think, well, I'm just going to do the diet, I'm just going to do the mindset, I'm just going to do the body. Well, you got
Yeah.
to do like the heart, mind, body, soul, the whole
Yeah.
thing.
You have to work on all the different parts of yourself. Yeah. And that's when you get to thrive. That's when it gets really exciting because you learn about yourself too. You learn how tough you are. You learn how much you're willing to push through the uncomfortableness and those boundaries and stand up and say, you know what, I am going to complete this training. I am going to go through this. And the other side is rock solid confidence.
Yeah. I mean, every time you do something, the way I look at it, like there's happy accidents, not
Mm-hmm.
failures, right? That you
Yes.
learn from the lessons learned. And a
Right.
lot of people are kind of shamed. Like if they're shamed into thinking they have to be perfect. And if they can't be perfect, they don't want to even execute, the
Right.
thing. And that's a big mistake that really prevents a lot of forward moving progress. Because then
I,
you never raise your hand, you don't participate, you don't get part, you don't
yeah,
move forward because you're like so scared of making that mistake. That's part of life, because you're going to get better.
exactly. And I agree with you 100%, and one of the things that I've learned to do is to just try something as an experiment and to not attach what I think an outcome should be. Like I don't know
Mhm.
what I'm going to get from this 2 days of intensive training. I mean, I have an idea of what I'm going to get from it, but I really don't know. And just being open to different possibilities removes any failure because
Yeah, yeah,
you go into that. A lot of people call it the childlike mindset.
yeah. It's
Just
very.
try it and see what happens.
Yeah,
You
that's what
know,
a lot of people would like grow out of it, but it's actually
mhm,
very necessary. If you notice, a lot of creatives they seem kind of young at heart,
mhm,
and they could
mhm.
be older than you expect, and it's like they still have that childlike kind of glow. They still got
Yes.
that childlike fervor
Mhm,
because that's what the whole thing is. Like that's and that's the benefit. Not that you get a million views, not that you get this X that you got something.
exactly.
The fact that you love to do what you're doing, and you love the experience of trying. That
Mhm.
it's like your adventures, like you said, you're an explorer.
Yes.
So that act of exploring doesn't mean that you're gonna get like X. It's the act
Mhm.
of exploring that's the benefit in itself, the actual thing you're doing.
Exactly. One of the things I shared with my publisher is, when if you take the time and the energy to push through a boundary, you're going to get a reward. The catch is you don't always know what that reward is going to be.
Yeah.
But there's always a reward, but it may not be what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, it's unintended consequences. Like, you do something, today, you might do a podcast and it could reach so many people. It could reach but the goal necessarily isn't that it got a million views. But
Right.
what if it reach a certain person, that person contacts you, gives you an opportunity that might be worth more than a million views.
Exactly.
Because the person that gave you the opportunity, that is unforeseen because you put the thing out there.
Exactly. And my context has always been to be authentic and to help people. And telling my story in an authentic, vulnerable way is really the only way that I know how to do it.
I think that's the lesson I try to convey through the podcast is you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to go edit and get all the ums out.
Right.
Go edit and try and add all this background music and do all this. The thing that's perfect is the conversation, the human conversation that we have without all the all the extra things. The extra things are nice. It's nice to have the nice things, but the point is the actual discussion.
Yeah. And to just be yourself and to realize that your journey is your journey and everybody's journey is unique and it's going to be different. And it doesn't have to look like the neighbor with the perfect picket fence and the perfect lawn. And, it doesn't have to look like that for it to be outstanding. It's your journey and it's as unique as we are as individuals.
Well, I hope everybody clicks on the link that we have there for you, ellenbusch.com. It's fully clickable when we're published on all the platforms. We have been live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And we're going to publish to all the other major platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio. But whatever platform people want to check out, we're going to have a landing page available for your fan base. And that will be out there and they can choose wherever they want to listen or watch the podcast again. And we do encourage people to check that out. And I thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. It was a great discussion.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this discussion and it's been wonderful. Thank you.